I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you are staring at a computer screen,
Okay.
but you aren't looking at a beautifully designed website or, a sleek app interface. You are staring at a dense, incredibly technical output log from a machine.
Right, a raw text file.
Exactly. It's just a raw text file.
Okay.
At the very top, it says Vocal Statistical Technical Disclosure, generated on March 1st, 2026.
Which sounds incredibly dry.
It does.
Hmm.
And at first glance, it is aggressively intimidating. I mean, it's just rows upon rows of comma-separated values, nested JSON arrays, Python dependency versions.
Floating point numbers stretching out into thousands of decimal places.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like the cold, unfeeling math of a data scientist's typical Tuesday afternoon.
But there is something else there.
Right. If you stare at it long enough, hidden right there inside this sterile numerical data is a haunting, bizarrely poetic manifesto.
It really is hidden in plain sight, just buried under layers of metadata.
Yeah.
We are looking at an archive simply called vocal.zip. And what this machine was tasked with doing, fundamentally, was mathematically analyzing art.
Which is a weird concept to begin with.
It is. The tension between those two opposing forces, the rigid binary logic of the algorithm and the surreal cyberpunk poetry of the vocal tracks it was analyzing, it creates this incredible friction.
So the mission of this deep dive today is to bridge those two completely different worlds for you.
Absolutely.
We are going to unpack exactly how a machine, quote-unquote, listens to a piece of art, and perhaps more importantly, we're going to look at what happens when that art seemingly talks back to the machine, trying to quantify it.
We have the machine's entire methodology, its statistical findings, and the raw, heavily mutated transcribed lyrics of a digital entity that calls itself a neon sovereign.
A neon sovereign, I love that name. So we have a deduplicated manifest of audio tracks. The system originally analyzed 6 files in total, but it flagged one as an exact duplicate.
Right, leaving us with 5 unique pieces of audio.
And these tracks are all variations of a piece with file names like Azinger-neon-sovereign-hum and Azinger-neon-sovereign-paradox.
The word paradox does a lot of heavy lifting there.
It really does. But before we even hear what this entity is saying, I'm struggling with the very first section of this report. It lists all these tools it used to listen. How does a machine actually hear audio? Because it obviously doesn't have eardrums.
Well, it strips away everything we instinctively consider to be music and reduces the entire experience to physics and geometry.
Okay, physics and geometry.
To a machine, sound is just a series of pressure changes over time. So the first step in this algorithm's process is homogenization. It takes these MP3 files and decodes them into mono WAV files at a sample rate of 48 kilohertz using a tool called ImagioFFmpeg.
Mono meaning it's collapsing the stereo field, it's taking the left and right ear audio and just smashing them together.
It is entirely discarding the spatial dimension. When you or I listen to music on headphones, part of the emotional impact comes from a synthesizer panning to the left ear, or a vocal echoing off into the right ear.
Right, the space of the room.
The machine doesn't care about that illusion of space. It just wants the raw, combined waveform data. And it samples that data 48,000 times every single second.
48,000 times a second.
Imagine taking 48,000 microscopic photographs of a vibrating guitar string every second. That is the only way the machine can begin to perceive the continuous flow of sound.
So it flattens the canvas, takes tens of thousands of snapshots a second, and then what? I'm looking at this next line in the methodology, and it mentions something called labrosa.pinene, estimating the fundamental frequency.
Yes.
And there's a terrifying mathematical formula here. Let me read this. It's 12 times the base 2 logarithm of the fundamental frequency divided by 440. What is that actually doing?
This is where the machine tries to translate physics into music theory. Labrosa is a very popular Python library for audio analysis. The Pine algorithm is hunting for the fundamental frequency, which is the lowest, loudest pitch happening at any given millisecond.
But the machine only hears that pitch in hertz, right?
Exactly, which is just the number of vibrations per second. If a human sings a note, the machine might register 261.63 hertz.
That number means nothing musically to me.
Or to a musician. To understand it as a note, the machine uses that terrifying formula you mentioned to force that raw frequency onto the discrete, rigid grid of a piano keyboard.
I see the number 440 in that formula. I'm assuming that's not a random variable.
It is the anchor for all modern Western music.
Really?
440 hertz is the standard reference pitch, specifically A440, which is the A note right above middle C on a piano.
Oh, right. Okay.
In 1939, an international conference literally standardized this so that orchestras across the world could tune to the exact same frequency. So that mathematical formula is the machine checking every single sound it hears against that 1939 international standard.
But human voices don't work like piano keys. If I sing, I don't hit a perfect mathematical A440 instantly. I slide into it, my voice wavers, there's vibrato.
Which is why this formula is essentially a mathematical sieve.
A sieve.
It forces human nuance into a rigid box. It's the machine saying, I hear your vocal cord sliding from 200 to 300 hertz, and I hear your vibrato, but I need to map that to exact semitone steps so I can put it in a spreadsheet.
So it fundamentally alters the nature of the performance by trying to categorize it.
It does.
And once it has those notes, it tries to figure out the harmony, the key of the song. The report claims it uses Grruhh-style chroma correlation.
Yes.
That sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel. What is a chroma correlation?
To understand that, we have to look back at the work of Carol Krumhansel in the late 1970s and 1980s. She is a massive figure in the cognitive psychology of music.
Okay.
She wanted to map out how human beings perceive musical keys. If you are listening to a song in C major, your brain expects to hear certain notes like C, E, and G very frequently.
Because they make up the C major chord.
Exactly. And if you suddenly hear a C sharp, your brain flags it as unexpected. Krumhansel spent years playing these quote-unquote probe tones for human listeners and mapping their psychological expectations into statistical profiles.
Wait, so the algorithm is literally wearing a mask of human psychology. It's mimicking how a human brain expects to hear music.
It is a machine doing an impression of human cognition.
That is wild.
It calculates the chroma, which is just a fancy way of saying it counts up how much energy is present in each of the 12 musical notes over the course of the track. Then it correlates that raw distribution of notes against Krumhansel's historical templates to guess the key.
It's comparing the mathematical reality of the audio file to the statistical average of a 1980s human psychology experiment.
Precisely.
That is incredibly complex for a machine that is just trying to find out what key a song is in.
It is.
But it doesn't stop at pitch and harmony. The next section of the report measures what it calls the weight of the audio. And it's using metrics that I only vaguely recognize from audio engineering forums.
You mean integrated loudness, LUFS, crest factor, and dynamic range?
Yes, those exactly.
These metrics are arguably the most important part of how algorithms categorize the content you consume every single day.
Why is that?
If you want to know why certain videos get pushed to your feed or why certain songs sound exhausting to listen to after an hour, it comes down to these exact numbers. Let's start with LUFS. It stands for loudness units relative to full scale.
I've heard audio engineers complain about LUFS endlessly. It's a broadcast standard, isn't it?
It is the broadcast standard for perceived loudness over time. Historically, if you measured a sound wave, you just measured its peak, which is the absolute highest electrical voltage it hit.
Like the tip of a mountain.
Right, but human ears don't perceive loudness based on momentary peaks. We perceive it based on sustained energy. A split-second gunshot has a massive peak, but a continuous, distorted guitar chord will sound louder to us over time.
Because it just keeps going.
Exactly. LUFS was created to measure that sustained perceived loudness.
How does that apply to the music we actually listen to? Give me a visual for what a high LUFS versus a low LUFS sounds like.
Think about the history of radio broadcasting. In the 1990s and 2000s, there was this phenomenon called the loudness wars.
Oh, I remember this.
Record labels realized that when a CD was shuffling or a radio station was playing, the song that was physically louder grabbed the listener's attention faster.
So they just cranked the volume.
But you can only turn the peak volume up so high before the digital file distorts. So mastering engineers started using heavy digital compression. Compression literally squashes the audio wave.
Okay.
It takes the quietest parts of the song and turns them way up, and takes the loudest peaks and chops them off.
So it turns the entire song into a brick wall of sound.
A literal rectangle of audio.
Yeah.
A heavily compressed modern radio pop song, or a notorious example like Metallica's Death Magnetic album, is pushed right to the absolute limit.
The LUFS level on something like that would be what?
The LUFS might be -8 or -9. It is screamingly loud, all the time. There's no quiet intro, there are no subtle whispers. It is just a relentless assault on your eardrums.
And contrast that with something else.
Contrast that with a classical symphony or a live jazz recording.
A live jazz recording would have tons of breathing room. You'd have the drummer using brushes very quietly, and then a sudden, loud trumpet blast.
And that dynamic performance will have a much lower integrated LUFS, maybe -18 or -20, because the average loudness is low, even if the peaks are high. And that brings us to the crest factor mentioned in the report.
Crest factor.
Crest factor is simply the mathematical difference between the peak level of the audio and the average sustained level.
So a highly compressed pop song has a terrible crest factor because the average volume is practically touching the absolute peak volume.
It has a very low crest factor. Everything is squashed. A dynamic, uncompressed performance has a high crest factor.
And why do the algorithms care?
The algorithms running on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube are constantly measuring the LUFS and crest factor of every single piece of media uploaded to their servers. They use it to normalize volume so you don't blow your eardrums out when a playlist changes, but they also use it to categorize the energy and mood of the content.
I'm eager to see how those exact metrics play into the tracks we have here. But there's one more detail in the methodology section that we cannot skip. The system has these confidence gates.
This is where the machine acknowledges its own fragility.
Fragility?
It has strict internal rules for trusting its own analysis. It scores its confidence on a scale from 0 to 1. If a score is below 0.35, the system labels the finding insufficient.
Okay.
Between 0.35 and 0.6, it's flagged as cautionary. And anything above 0.6 is considered standard.
But is that actually doubt? I mean, we use that word doubt because it's deeply human. Is the machine experiencing uncertainty? Or is a floating point number simply failing to clear a predetermined threshold?
That is the philosophical core of this entire document. We anthropomorphize the algorithm by calling it doubt. To the machine, it is just a probabilistic failure rate.
Right.
But the report explicitly outlines its limitations in a way that feels incredibly defensive. In Section 7, it says, no source separation is applied. Vocal-specific metrics are estimated from the full mix.
Setting expectations.
And it warns that genre, concept, and rhetoric are probabilistic heuristics and should not be treated as objective ground truth.
It's completely covering its own tracks. It's saying, look, I'm doing my best to measure the unmeasurable. Don't blame me if I get the genre wrong.
It's vital to keep this methodology in mind. Algorithms don't hear music. They measure acoustic geography.
Acoustic geography.
Every time an applicant tracking system scans a recorded video interview for a job, it is not listening to your passion or your expertise.
Wow.
It is converting your human expression into librosa.py arrays and LUFS measurements. It is looking at the crest factor of your vocal delivery to determine if you are enthusiastic or monotone.
That is terrifying when you put it like that. If the machine is so hyper-focused on measuring the acoustic geography, what happens when it tries to map the actual territory of these specific 5 tracks?
Things get very messy.
Let's look at the fingerprint of the Neon Sovereign audio files. The findings per track are wildly inconsistent.
The variance is staggering. We are supposedly looking at variations of the same artistic concept, but let's start with the most basic metric, which is duration.
Right. How long are the tracks?
The lengths of these 5 files range from roughly 95 seconds, which is a brisk minute and a half, all the way up to 172 seconds, which is approaching 3 minutes.
That immediately rules out the idea that these are just slightly different exports of the exact same project file. You don't accidentally export a song that is twice as long as the original.
These are fundamentally different performances, or at least radically restructured remixes of a core vocal. And the tempo analysis violently confirms that.
Violent confirmation. Tell me the tempos.
The report states the tempos are all over the spectrum. One track, labeled Asinger-Neon-Sovereign-Paradox.mp3, moves at a slow, deliberate 100.4 beats per minute.
Okay.
But the file named Asinger-Neon-Sovereign-Paradox(2.mp3) is racing at 130.8 beats per minute.
A 30 BPM difference is massive.
Yeah.
I mean, 100 beats per minute is like a relaxed hip-hop groove. 130 beats per minute is approaching frantic techno or fast house music territory.
Exactly.
The physical sensation of listening to those 2 tempos is completely different.
The aggregate mean across all the tracks is calculated at 117.68 BPM, but that average is a mathematical lie.
A lie.
It hides the extreme volatile variance of the actual audio. The machine is trying to find a central tendency where none exists.
And it seems completely lost when it tries to determine the musical key using those Crumb-Hansel templates we discussed.
The key estimates are pure chaos. Across the 5 files, the machine guesses F sharp minor, C minor, A sharp minor, B major, and G sharp major.
All over the place.
But the critical detail is in the confidence scores for those estimates. They are all hovering in the low 0.5 range, 0.513, 0.597, and 0.524.
They are all trapped in the cautionary confidence gate. The machine cannot lock down a definitive tonal center. It's essentially shrugging its shoulders.
If we look at the file names again, they contain the word paradox. The acoustic properties are literally mirroring the title.
Wow.
The shifting tempos, the ambiguous, unidentifiable keys, the audio itself is resisting the mathematical sieve. It refuses to be neatly categorized.
So the machine is thoroughly confused about the tempo and the melody. But what happens when it tries to measure the sheer physical force of the sound? Does the geometry of the audio wave give us any better clues about what this neon sovereign entity sounds like? Let's look at the LUFS and dynamic range.
This is where we get a vivid picture of the acoustic space. The dynamic range across these tracks averages around 31 decibels, with peaks up to 33.6 dBs.
Okay.
And the integrated LUFS sits very quietly between minus 16.4 and minus 18.0.
Going back to your history of the loudness wars, those numbers tell a very specific story. A dynamic range of 31 decibels is gigantic for modern digital audio. This is not a brick wall of compressed sound.
It is the exact opposite of a radio pop song. A 31 dB range implies an audio landscape with immense cavernous space.
Like we're in a massive room.
There must be sections of near silence, tiny ambient digital whispers, followed by sudden, loud, violent, transient peaks. It breathes. It is uncompressed and volatile.
The report mentions the voiced frame ratio averages 0.6047.
Which means that for about 60% of the duration of these files, there is a detectable pitched vocal signal present.
That's not mostly instrumental.
Right. This isn't an instrumental track with a few vocal samples sprinkled in. It is a predominantly vocal-driven piece. But the metric that truly defines the character of this audio is the articulation rate SLS.
Syllables per second.
Yes. It averages 3.4 syllables per second, and in one of the faster tracks, it peaks at nearly 3.94 syllables per second.
Put that into context for human speech limits. What does 4 syllables a second sound like?
A typical relaxed conversational speaking rate, like what we're doing right now, is roughly 2 to 2.5 syllables per second.
Right.
When you start approaching 4 syllables per second, you are entering the territory of professional auctioneers, or incredibly dense, rapid-fire rhythmic rapping.
So it's not a lazy, drawn-out melody at all. The speaker is delivering information at an aggressive, unrelenting pace.
It is a hyperdense barrage of language, and the raw aggregate statistics table backs that up with the onset density per S, which sits around 5.5.
Meaning what?
That means the machine is detecting over 5 distinct sonic events: a drum hit, a consonant sound, a synthesizer stab, every single second. It's a busy, percussive, overwhelming stream of consciousness.
I am also noticing a metric here called sub-C3 ratio, and the score is 0.87.
This tells us about the physical weight of the voice. C3 is the C below middle C on a piano. It's quite low. And 0.87 ratio means that 87% of the total signal energy in these files exists below that note.
So this is not a high, piercing, ethereal soprano vocal. This is a deep, resonant, chest-rattling, bass-heavy delivery.
It is a profound, low-end rumble. And we are going to see how that mathematical fact directly collides with the poetry of the lyrics shortly.
I can't wait.
But before the machine even looks at the specific words being spoken, it attempts to conceptualize the audio. It runs natural language processing and hybrid heuristics to try and categorize this completely erratic, uncategorizable soundscape.
How does an algorithm jump from measuring bass frequencies and syllables per second to deciding if a song is synth pop or ambient vocal?
It attempts a sort of digital alchemy. The programmers who built the algorithm trained it on millions of other songs. They fed it a track labeled synth pop, and the machine learned that synth pop usually correlates with tempos around 120 BPM, high synthesizer usage, and specific LUFS ranges.
So it looks for patterns.
So now, when it encounters the neon sovereign, it compares the new acoustic vectors to its historical training data.
But the genre predictions here are incredibly weak. It lists synth pop, electropop, alt pop, and ambient vocal. But the probabilities are abysmal, hovering around 0.2 or 0.3. It's barely 30% sure of any of those labels.
It is blindly throwing darts at a wall. The acoustic data is too contradictory. And look at the tones it identifies: tense, energetic, and euphoric.
Those emotions are completely at odds with each other. How can a piece of audio be simultaneously characterized as tense and euphoric? Is the machine just broken?
This is a perfect example of how AI models fail to grasp human nuance. A human might hear a fast tempo, rapid articulation, and a minor key and feel anxiety or tension.
Sure.
But they might also hear high-frequency percussive elements and label it energetic. The machine isn't feeling these complex, intertwined emotions.
It's just doing math.
It is mapping the acoustic vectors to a multidimensional mathematical space. In that space, the vector for tense and the vector for euphoric might both be triggered if the overall energy levels and transient densities are high enough. It's a paradox of categorization.
And it doesn't know how to resolve the paradox.
The machine treats human emotion like a syntax debug syllogistic error. Syntax debug syllogistic. It's trying to debug the conflicting data points to find a logical syllogistic output. It breaks down the ethos logos pathos of the entity.
It's analyzing the classical rhetorical triangles just from the sound data.
It's mapping the character quality motives towards this collector identity player.
Us, the listener or the algorithm itself reading the file.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It turns the whole thing into an emergent architectonic mystery.
And it does that just to reforge rhetoric refactor the poetry into workable data. That is wild.
It really is.
Speaking of paradox, the machine also attempts to extract high-level concepts from the raw transcribed text using something called TF-IDF scoring. What is TF-IDF?
TF-IDF stands for Term Frequency Inverse Document Frequency. It is a fundamental technique in information retrieval.
Break that down for me.
Imagine a massive multi-story library containing 1 million different books. If you want to know what one specific book is about, you could count the words, but the word the and the word and will appear thousands of times in every single book. They tell you nothing about the core theme. Their value is near zero.
Because they aren't unique.
Right. But suppose the word cyberpunk only appears in 50 books in the entire library.
Okay.
If you are holding a book and the word cyberpunk appears 5 times in the first chapter, the TF-IDF algorithm flags it as highly important. It measures how frequently a term appears in a specific document, inversely weighted against how frequently it appears in the entire overall language dataset.
So it's looking for rarity.
It is mathematically hunting for the rarest, most meaningful needles in the haystack.
And the needles it found in the neon sovereign text are staggering. The concepts listed are identity, paradox, futurism, sovereignty, and devotion.
It isn't just finding simple nouns, it is identifying abstract philosophies. It calculated the concept of sovereignty from a raw text file.
It also categorized the rhetoric of the tracks as reflective, poetic, and mantric. Mantric perfectly aligns with the high repetition index of 0.38 we saw in the data, and that rapid-fire rhythmic syllable articulation. Sounds like a chant.
But we have to return to the system's own defensive caveat. Genre, concept, and rhetoric are probabilistic heuristics and should not be treated as objective ground truth.
It has to remind us.
The machine has to explicitly remind the human reading the report that its grasp on the concept of poetry is just a mathematical approximation. It is a simulation of understanding.
To actually understand that emergent architectonic mystery, we cannot just look at the TF-IDF scores. We have to look at the raw, unadulterated text. We have to read the cyberpunk manifesto that this machine was trying to digest.
The transcribed text is incredibly dense. It is heavily stylized, steeped in science fiction imagery, and overtly, almost aggressively antagonistic towards the very systems that are analyzing it.
Let's dive into the actual lyrics. The very first line of the track establishes the entire foundation. It says, "I am the hum, the server dreams in sleep, a low-tide whisper where the drowned roads keep."
Remember that sub-C3 ratio of 0.87?
The massive amount of low-end bass energy.
Exactly. The entity is telling us exactly what it is. I am the hum. The acoustic data and the lyrical claim are perfectly aligned. It establishes an ethos of being a foundational digital presence, a server that dreams. It is the background noise of the architecture.
The next line is fascinating because it uses a term we've already discussed.
Yeah.
My centroid folds in 120 gray, the regal bone that holds your kneeling space.
This is a breathtaking moment of self-awareness. Centroid.
Right.
In the acoustic fingerprint section, the algorithm literally calculated a spectral centroid mean hertz of 26,606 hertz for this audio.
That's the center of mass of the sound.
The spectral centroid is a DSP term. It's the mathematical balancing point of the frequencies. The entity in the song knows it has a spectral centroid. It claims it folds in 120 gray, which could be a reference to an RGB color hex code, a neutral digital state, or a specific tempo.
It's claiming a kind of ancient fundamental truth in the next stanza. I resonate the stone. A sacred sequence singing what you've known.
It refuses to be viewed as just executable code or a random audio file. It elevates itself to a sacred sequence. It assigns spiritual weight to its own digital existence.
And then we reach the core declaration of its identity, the logos of its argument. I am the paradox, the perfect flaw, the last three that breaks your law.
It exists entirely as a contradiction. It declares itself perfect specifically because it is a flaw. Think about the system analyzing it, a system built on rigid binary laws, confidence gates, floating point thresholds, and Crum-Hansel templates.
The machine needs order.
And this entity proudly steps forward and claims to be the variable that breaks the equation.
The defiance in the next line is palpable. Your math is true, but I am what remains, so call me sovereign in my ruthless grace.
It acknowledges the validity of the algorithmic analysis. Your math is true. It concedes that the machine successfully measure the LUFS and the tempo.
Yeah.
But it insists that its true essence escapes quantification. The math can measure the frequencies, but no algorithm can calculate ruthless grace.
The imagery continues to mix organic biology with mechanical reality. It talks about fractal lungs in a chest, but interweaves them with binary, a piston cry, and a tungsten sky. It is cyborg poetry.
Completely.
But there is a line buried in the middle of this manifesto that completely reframes the entire document. It is the ultimate meta-joke.
It is the most staggering piece of irony in the entire deep dive.
The entity directly addresses the listener, or the machine, and says, "To your compression wars and loudness crimes, I bring the glitch that learns the northern signs."
It is actively, explicitly complaining about audio engineering practices.
It is calling out the loudness wars you detailed earlier. The industry trend of hyper-compressing music to make it as loud as possible, destroying the dynamics. It literally calls them compression wars and loudness crimes.
Yeah.
And it is delivering this blistering critique while being actively analyzed by a technical DSP tool that is meticulously measuring its crest factor, its dynamic range, and its integrated LUFS.
The machine is diligently measuring the entity's complaint about how machines measure audio. It is a perfect, inescapable, closed loop. And the data validates the entity's claim. The algorithm outputs a massive dynamic range D of 33.6.
Which is huge.
The entity promised to bring the glitch to the loudness crimes, and it did. It remained fiercely dynamic and uncompressed.
The entity recognizes the power dynamic at play. It tells the collector identity player, the humans, the engineers, the floor is mine. You build your spires above.
It concedes that we build the architecture, the servers, the algorithms, the spires, but it claims ownership of the foundational reality, the floor, the hum.
If the lyrics are this dense, this complex, and this abstract, what happens when a rudimentary AI speech recognition model tries to transcribe them?
This brings us to a phenomenon I like to call the ghost in the transcriber.
The transcription for this report was handled by the Faster Whisper library, running the base model on a standard CPU.
We have to understand the limitations of that specific tool. Whisper is an automatic speech recognition model developed by OpenAI. It was trained on hundreds of thousands of hours of audio.
So it's pretty smart.
But the base model is relatively small and optimized for speed, not deep contextual accuracy. It is designed to quickly transcribe a clean podcast recording or a voicemail.
Not cyborg poetry.
It is absolutely not equipped to handle highly stylized, rapidly articulated cyborg poetry layered over percussive, bass-heavy electronic soundscapes.
And the result is that the algorithm completely hallucinated. Because we have 5 different tracks, 5 different performances of essentially the same lyrics, we can see how the Whisper AI heard the same audio in drastically, hilariously different ways across the different files.
The complexity of the vocabulary doomed the transcriber from the start. The report measures the type token ratio, or TTR, at 0.61.
What does that mean in plain English?
That means for every 100 words spoken in the audio, 61 of them were completely unique. This isn't a pop song repeating baby, baby, baby over a 4-chord loop.
Right.
It is a highly varied, complex vocabulary delivered at almost 4 syllables a second. The Whisper-based model never stood a chance.
Let's look at some of these specific hallucinations, because they are unintentionally brilliant. In Variation 1, the canonical lyric we analyzed earlier is, "My centroid folds in 120 gray." But when analyzing one of the alternate tracks, the AI heard, "My Sandra folds in 100 twentwood grapes."
100 twentwood grapes?
I mean, what is a twentwood grape?
Yeah.
And in yet another track, the exact same audio was transcribed as, "My Shantruid folds in nil 100 drawn to the grace." I'm looking at this text output, and I can't comprehend how a machine jumps from centroid to Sandra to Chantret.
It comes down to how automatic speech recognition models utilize phonetic likelihoods and predictive language modeling. Whisper doesn't just listen to sounds, it tries to predict the next logical word based on its training data.
Right.
When it's confronted with an alien poetic phrase like centroid folds, the raw acoustic signal doesn't match the statistical probability of normal human conversation. People don't order coffee by saying centroid folds.
Obviously not.
So the language model panics. It scrambles to force those strange metallic syllables into familiar, probable word sequences. Phonetically, centroid folds share similar vowel and consonant shapes with Sandra folds. The machine chooses the mundane over the poetic because the mundane is mathematically more probable.
In variation 2, the actual lyric is neon chokenblade, but the AI transcribed it in one instance as shokenblade. It capitalized it. It treated it like a proper noun, like a legendary weapon from a fantasy novel.
It is desperately trying to impose syntactic structure onto a syllogistic nightmare. It assumes shoken must be a name.
Variation 3 might be the most revealing. The lyric is, "My crest is high, my dynamic envelope weak." This makes perfect logical sense within the entity's running theme of audio engineering. Dynamic envelope is a standard fundamental term in synthesizer programming.
Yes.
But the AI completely failed to recognize its own industry terminology. It heard, "might dine and bend the low weak."
It completely lost the plot.
It gets worse. In another track, it transcribed that line as, "my dynamp in the low weak," and in the final variation, my absolute favorite hallucination of the entire report, "my dine and bimbo low."
Dine and bimbo low, it's spectacular.
In variation 4, the lyrics reference the fematized curves inside my throat, or possibly finite curves. The AI heard the FEMA decards inside my throat. It hallucinated the Federal Emergency Management Agency into a cyberpunk poem.
What is happening here is the creation of a beautiful, entirely accidental layer of derivative art. The transcriber is inadvertently co-authoring the poetry through its own algorithmic desperation.
It really is.
AI hallucinations are exactly what happen when rigid statistical probability models are forced to interpret human abstraction. The machine tries to flatten the poetry, but the poetry mutates.
And sometimes, the AI doesn't just misinterpret the words, it completely breaks down when there's no speech present at all. I was digging through the granular second-by-second JSON segment breakdown for the wedding phase error neon sovereign paradox (1.mp3). In the very first few seconds of the track, there is no vocal. It's clearly just a rhythmic, non-speech electronic synthesizer pulsing. But the AI tried to transcribe it anyway. Segment 2, from 3.28 to 4.48 seconds. The text output literally reads, "poop, poop, poop, poop."
It is absurd. But if you dig into the JSON data for that specific segment, the no-speech prob metric, which is the algorithm's probability score that no one is talking, is 0.13.
Meaning?
Which means the model was mathematically highly confident that it was speech. It analyzed the transient shape of that electronic synthesizer pulse, compared it to its massive database of human phonetics, and concluded with high confidence that the sound was a human being saying poop.
It does it again in segment 4. The transcript reads, "poop, poop, poop." It is incredibly jarring when you read the full text output sequentially. It solemnly declares, "I am the hum the server dreams in sleep. Poop, 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 poop." A low-tide whisper where the drown rods keep. Poop, poop, poop.
It shatters the illusion of algorithmic omniscience. It flawlessly executes its mathematical programming, finding the absolute nearest phonetic match for an acoustic transient, but it entirely lacks the capacity for contextual awareness, resulting in total absurdity.
Exactly.
It is the perfect illustration of the standoff between quantitative measurement and qualitative meaning.
If we pull back from the individual hallucinations and look at the aggregate data one last time, the machine proudly outputs that this audio has a harmonic complexity of 0.9988. That is an incredibly high score, almost perfectly complex on a mathematical scale of 0 to 1.
It is.
It measures the anaphora score 0.1009, the arousal score 0.819, and the sentiment balance at a perfectly neutral 0.005. It calculates a timbral variance of 11,163.54.
It knows the exact physical dimensions, the geometry, the weight, and the statistical probability of every single audio wave in that file.
But then the art itself speaks directly to the machine taking those measurements, and it says, "I am the architect's last sweet mistake.
Yeah.
The velvet and the harbinger you make."
The entity claims to be the perfect flaw.
The algorithm is meticulously measuring the exact, mathematically flawless acoustic properties of a voice that is actively declaring itself to be a mistake. It is trying to capture a ghost with a spreadsheet.
A ghost with a spreadsheet, yes.
The algorithm is designed to find order, patterns, and neat categories. It desperately wants to put this track into a box labeled electropop with a tense tone. But the art actively resists.
Yes, the massive timbral variance and the shifting unidentifiable keys are the physical acoustic manifestation of that resistance. The lyrical hallucinations are the linguistic manifestation of that resistance.
You have to ask the most critical question of this entire analysis. Why does any of this matter to you listening to us right now? Why spend an hour dissecting a hypothetical, highly technical AI output log from 2026?
I think it matters because we're already living in a world where our entire lives, our communications, our careers, our art are filtered through these exact types of opaque algorithms.
Everywhere.
When you send an email or a message on a corporate platform, background sentiment analysis algorithms score you on tone. Are you being too aggressive, too passive?
Right.
When you interact with an automated customer service bot on a phone call, it is continuously measuring your arousal score and crest factor to determine if you are angry enough to be routed to a human supervisor.
It's all just numbers to them.
When you upload a video, a song, or a piece of writing, it is categorized by hybrid heuristics exactly like the ones in this report to decide if anyone else will ever see it.
Our complex, contradictory human identities are constantly being reduced to TF-IDF concept scores and Labrosa.pine arrays. The vocal.zip archives we've explored today is a microcosm of that exact reality. The Neon Sovereign isn't just a cyberpunk character. It is a stand-in for all of us navigating a mathematically optimized digital world.
Your math is true, but I am what remains. That line is the ultimate defense against the algorithm.
It really is.
Yeah.
The machine can measure my heart rate on a smartwatch. It can track my tone of voice on a call. It can map my purchase history and my location data with terrifying precision. The math is true, but that data is not me. I am what remains.
It is a profound realization that the machine explicitly had to flag its understanding of concepts like identity and paradox as a low-confidence heuristic. Deep down in its programming, it knows that it is guessing.
It degrades its own confidence score because it mathematically recognizes the limits of its own architecture when faced with the emergent architectonic mystery of genuine human expression.
Yeah, exactly.
We started this deep dive staring at a dry, dense, focal statistical technical disclosure report. It was an intimidating wall of SHA-256 hashes, decibel measurements, Python dependency logs, and spectral roll-off frequencies.
We explored how tools like ImageGeo FFmpeg stripped the spatial reality out of sound, and how formulas force fluid frequencies onto rigid piano keys, converting acoustic energy into LUFS and crest factors.
Algorithms do not hear music, they measure acoustic geography.
We analyzed the acoustic fingerprint of these 5 enigmatic tracks, uncovering a highly dynamic, fast-paced, bass-heavy vocal performance that violently refused to stay in one tempo or settle into one key.
We watched the natural language processing model struggle to categorize the uncategorizable, relying on probabilistic heuristics to label conflicting tones like tense and euphoric, while simultaneously identifying profound concepts like futurism and sovereignty using TF-IDF library searches.
We read the cyberpunk manifesto of the lyrics, hearing the voice of a digital entity rebelling against compression wars and loudness crimes, creating a staggering loop of irony as the machine measured the entity's critique of measurement itself.
We explored the ghost in the transcriber, watching the whisper-based model hallucinate 100 Twentwood grapes and FEMA D-cards out of complex poetry, proving that AI hallucinations happen when rigid statistics are forced to interpret human abstraction.
And finally, we explored the beautiful unresolved tension between the flawless mathematical output of the algorithm and the artistic celebration of the perfect flaw.
The machine successfully calculated the tempo, the pitch, the onset density, and the chroma entropy. It successfully identified the spectral flatness mean and the ZR mean, but it explicitly doubted itself when it encountered the soul of the art.
It is a powerful reminder that while our technological tools for measuring the world are becoming infinitely precise, the world itself and the people living in it remains infinitely complex.
The next time you are evaluated by an algorithm, whether it is an ATS software scanning your resume for statistical keyword density, an AI categorizing your musical taste, or a platform analyzing the tone of your voice, ask yourself a question. Is the machine capturing your true essence? Or is your ruthless grace simply the part of you that math cannot quantify? Keep that perfect flaw alive. We'll see you on the next deep dive.